This is Devin, and this is the Cage Rage podcast. And back riding shotgun with me is my buddy Amanda Schutte, who I haven't talked to in a while, but I always look forward to having on the podcast with me to break down some mixed martial arts. And Amanda, I don't know about you, but over the past weekend, at least with the main card, I think we got about as perfect of a main card as we could have got at UFC 241 over the weekend. The only knock that I would say that would have made it just even more perfect is if Nate Diaz would have got that finish in the third. I think that really would have set the crowd off. And that's not a knock at Anthony Pettis because I've always loved him too. But in the main event, we'll just start from the top and work our way down. In the main event, we had a very notable heavyweight title rematch. The first time they met up, Daniel Cormier goes up, becomes a champ, knocking Stipe out in the first round. This time, Stipe comes back and gets vengeance. What is your thoughts on the heavyweight title rematch here between Stipe and DC, Amanda?
Well, I feel like, for one, I have to just give it to Stipe for those body shots. Because until he brought out those body shots, he was losing. And he was going to lose. And he saw that opening. I don't know if his coaches told him to do it. I don't know if someone in his corner was like, hey, that's open. You need to take it. But I think he did, 6 of them? And that was it. The fight was over. All DC's team gone. All of his energy drained. It was all gone. And up until then, DC had been really good at keeping the fight where he wanted it. You know what I mean? It was a slow grind, a lot of dirty boxing, getting in close, breaking the distance. But then he just I don't know if he started gassing himself. But there was one point, and I don't know, we all know that DC kind of gets inside of his own head, right? He has weight, he worries about his image and things like that. So at one point, I think it was after the second round, maybe, in his corner, he asks, am I losing? Because of the way the corner was talking to him, right? So they said something about we don't want to see any more of that or something, right? And it was a valid statement, but from a fighter's perspective, he wasn't able to understand the specific item that they were talking about. He just thought he was doing bad. And I think that is when it really started to come apart for him. I think they got in his head.
You know, that's what my buddies that were here sitting around the living room that were watching that with me, that's what they were saying at the same time. And I hear that argument. I'm not sure if I agree, though, just because I know what kind of a competitor Daniel Cormier is. I kind of interpreted, and I could be wrong, you could be absolutely right on this, that he's just such a zoned out competitor that he don't even know how.
Did you see the look on his face?
Yeah, he did look a little.
He said, "Am I losing?"
Yeah, he looked a little bit
discouraged. He was very deflated. Yeah,
and he mentioned afterwards, I saw at the post conference that his corner was begging him to go back to his wrestling. And there's 2 big takeaways I saw in this fight. Number one was Stipe. Stipe, this was his defining moment. I mean, even more than the Ngannou fight, this just set him into a caliber of he's a true legend of the sport now. He's arguably the best heavyweight we've ever seen. I mean, I've seen a lot of comparisons this week about prime Fedor in the 2000s versus prime Stipe right now, who would win, and I think that's a real question. And he made the adjustments. He hung strong. But then my other takeaway with this is Daniel Cormier is just another one of these long list of fighters who get in there. They have this wrestling and grappling background. They get a few knockouts on their resume, and then all of a sudden they forget what their bread and butter is. Because he should have went back to the wrestling. He was clearly the more dominant grappler in that first round. He picked Stipe up, and if this would have been Pride Rules and he could have slammed him on his head, he would have probably killed him. And I mean, it would have been. Can you imagine a heavyweight version of Jessica Andrade and Rose Namajunas in that first round? It was kind of scary, but at the very beginning, DC was getting his shots off, and he looked like a man among a boy in the grappling department. But he never went back to it. And as you mentioned, those body shots in the 4th round were just textbook placement. And DC hung strong, but once Stipe saw him wince and started noticing, okay, he's hurt, he pounced and the fight was over.
Which really is a testament to the fight IQ that Stipe has and what he's developed, because we've seen fights that, the guy's hurt. Like, he is physically hurt. We at home can see, like, he's not using that hand right. He's not using that foot right. He's not balancing weight on that knee. You know, we can tell that they're hurt, but when they're in that moment and they're in that fight, being able to really see that and recognize that comes with experience. And DC is not only gifted athletically, mentally he's very strong. He's a very mentally strong fighter, and I think a lot of that goes back to the fact that he's a firefighter. You know, that you talk about wrestlers being a different breed, and they are, but I feel like firefighters, it's a whole nother level. It's different.
No, absolutely.
So.
I mean, that was one of the big, takeaways the country really rallied about was the first responders on 9/11 that had the courage to run up in burning buildings and stuff. And I mean, that's what we see with firefighters, that they're willing to run into the danger while everybody else is running out. And Stipe,
well, not just that, but the training.
Mm-hmm.
The training the firefighters go through, full suit, full tank, you know, the smoke, everything. I can't even imagine how much better Stipe's cardio is if he were the exact same person and was not a firefighter.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, because it just, what they put their bodies through to be a firefighter. Like, having the courage to run up a building, absolutely. Having the ability to run up a building fully loaded, different animal.
Absolutely. And, you know, with the fallout of UFC 241, we go from having two divisions right now, which I think for the past at least 5 years, heavyweight and light heavyweight have been the weakest divisions in terms of depth, for sure, out of all the male, especially out of the male divisions in the sport. But right now we've got pretty interesting, possibilities up at the top of these two divisions right now, at least with the elite of the elite, and especially with Stipe winning, because obviously we have a possibility of a trilogy match. We have the Ngannou rematch, which I think is very interesting, and we all know Stipe is probably the more complete MMA fighter still, for sure, but Ngannou can still knock anybody out. I mean, to go to 5 more rounds with that man and not get knocked out is definitely going to be a challenge. We also have the possibility of John Jones, which was with the big talk was going to be a DC Jones trilogy had he won. And when you look down there at his division, I mean, you got young guys like Johnny Walker and Dominic Reyes and Alexander Rakic, and all these guys are coming up, but they're not anywhere near ready. And then the other guys he's beat, so there's nobody there for him. And then I saw this week Brock Lesnar's coming out talking about he wants to come fight John Jones. So
I have one word for that: USADA.
Yeah. And well, it's with John Jones, but I mean, even with the whole
they can both be USADA.
With the whole thing with that though is I don't care if DC did just lose this. He's definitely probably lost the trilogy fight with John Jones after losing this. But if they take from him the Brock Lesnar money fight too, I mean, that's just like a slap in the face to a great fighter in DC to me, and I hope that doesn't happen. But where do you think that do you think this is in the end of the road for DC? Do you think Stipe is going to be moving for a rematch with Ngannou or a trilogy fight with DC, or do you think that Jones is going to come up and fight Stipe? What are you suspecting is next for us in the heavyweight division right now?
Well, I feel like the Jones-Lesnar fight is more money.
Mm-hmm.
And when all else fails, the UFC and any promoting company is about making the money, right? So I feel like that's something that if the possibility is there, we're going to see it. I'm not interested in it.
And he has nobody. He's been talking about wanting to fight at the end of the year, and there's nobody. I mean, unless they run a rematch back with Anthony Smith, there is nobody right now with Thiago Santos hurt for John Jones to fight.
I mean, my thing is I'm not – so I'm not a John Jones fan. Like, let's just let him and McGregor get in a cage and play who's the biggest asshole, And let's just see which one wins.
Yeah, and I saw John come out and make a Twitter post about Stipe being the best heavyweight of all time. And I think
DC definitely could be done. I mean, did you see his Instagram post where he was like, I'm sorry to my family, I'm sorry to my fans, I can't believe my kids had to see me like that.
Mm-hmm.
he's really reflecting. He's really sitting with these feelings right now and taking time. And he's always very sad after a loss, but this one is going to be even bigger because this was his O, right? And he didn't lose his O when he was 25, 27, even 30, when he has plenty of time to come back from losing it. He lost his O with maybe one fight left in him. And that's heartbreaking. You know what I mean? That's like Demetrius Johnson level loss, you know? And now DJ, he went over to ONE FC and he's overseas and fighting and doing amazing. Misha Tate's over there. But I just don't see, DC just needs to be done.
Well, I think a lot of it's going to come down to how confident DC is moving forward because he knows financially he's good. He's got detail. He's got the commentating gig. He's going to be remembered as a great ambassador and great figurehead for the sport. I mean, a great champion.
Oh, for sure.
And he was very accomplished. But as you mentioned, I mean, there was an asterisk next to those Jones losses. Yeah, I mean, even though he got the losses, and there's a lot of people that are always going to remember that. Number one, even in a positive look at Jon Jones, it's Jon Jones. Nobody else has been able to do it. So losing to him is not that big of a deal. And he was cutting all the way to 205. And one of those losses is technically a no contest because it was overturned because of Jon's USADA violation. So there was some asterisks there, and I had this kind of movie fantasy idea of how this would end with DC's career, that he would beat Stipe again, get the third Jones fight, and I just always thought it would be an amazing Hollywood ending to see him drop Jones and walk out as the GOAT. That's obviously probably not going to happen now. But my thing with Cormier is I think he's going to come back if he feels he can win the trilogy fight with Stipe, because he could still define himself as I was the greatest heavyweight. You know, I was still the prime heavyweight. But coming back for a third fight and losing that one too would be really devastating to his career. So I think a lot of it's just going to be how much does he really want to risk right now to his legacy? Because we already talked about he was winning this fight. Like, he could say I knocked him out in the first. You know. Anyway, yeah, there's good arguments that he could make about where he was in this fight. As we mentioned, he was winning the fight.
And, for sure.
And he knocked him out in the first fight. So I think a lot of it's going to come down to what kind of a risk does DC want to take at this point in his career. Because the second loss in Stipe would be pretty devastating. He's not going to get the Jones fight at this point. So I think the only thing that he could come back to right now would be a trilogy fight with Stipe. I think it would be good money. I'm definitely tuning in. I want to see it. I think there is unfinished business there. I'd like to see DC come in and stay on game plan this time. But if he decides to hang it up, it's been a great career, and I look forward to seeing him because we're going to be seeing DC for years to come.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. And moving on down the card, the people's main event of the evening was Nate Diaz making his return after 3 years, taking on Anthony Showtime Pettis. And this one was my safest call for the night. I was kind of surprised there were so many people picking Anthony in this fight, but
it was because he starts Thompson. I mean, let's be honest. That's why they were picking him.
Mm-hmm.
He's been on a good run. Look, Nate is one of those fighters that people want to fight him until they're in the ring with him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once they get in the cage, they're like, oh, maybe this wasn't the greatest idea. Maybe I shouldn't have.
And I think...
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think a lot of people don't understand how the Diaz brothers get what they get done because they've not really haven't really watched boxing too much. If you watch high-level boxing, I remember, because I started watching MMA really hardcore way before I started watching boxing. I'd watch these top-level boxers, and I'd watch the first 3 or 4 rounds, and I'd think that I'm like, you know, what's so great about this guy? I think he's down 4 rounds right now. Something like the Conor McGregor-Floyd Mayweather fight. It looked like Conor was winning that the early rounds of the fight. But then you start to see Floyd just really take over mid-fight. And it's because people with these boxing backgrounds, they know how to get rhythms mid-fight. They know how to make adjustments. They wait to get people's timing real well. And I thought Nate Diaz, this was the most impressive Nate Diaz I've ever seen. I think he's really improved
I don't ever want to see him cut weight again.
No. And he fought this fight like a very experienced martial artist. And I kept telling everybody, what have we seen from Nate in the Conor fights and Nick Diaz and several other fights? Just wait till the middle of the second round, and you're going to start seeing, his opponent start fading. And
Well, and Cowboy was always the same way. Cowboy was always the same way. That first round, he was shit. Everybody knew if you wanted to put Cowboy away, you did it in the first round. Now, Nate normally doesn't start off quite as slow, but I think some of that had to do with the different weight. And he respects Pettis, right? Like, he can go out there and talk all the trash he wants, but you can't ignore the last 3 fights Pettis has had and just walk out there and expect to walk through him, even when you are Nate Diaz.
And, I had a buddy who was watching this fight with me. He's like, man, Nate looks kind of drowsy. And I was like, at the beginning of the second round, because he was just kind of lackluster at the beginning. Really didn't seem like he had his feet underneath him. But then about midway through the second round, you start seeing Anthony, just that same thing we've seen with the Diaz brothers so many times, where their opponent just really starts looking like they are just desperate for air. And
well, it's those 35 and 45% shots, right? When Nate throws over 300 shots in 3 rounds, just keeping up to not get hit is going to make people tired, let alone also carrying an offensive angle with the fight, right? So, if I don't think people really understand, because when you're watching Nate, you don't really think he's throwing that many shots because he's not throwing like Ngannou style bombs, right? He's peppering you. He's just irritating the shit out of your skin, your muscles, your body, your breathing. That's what he's doing. He's getting you off center like the whole time. And then as soon as he like sees like, okay, that worked, you're done. You're just done. Now, I'll be honest, and I'm going to say, I want to see the Masvidal Diaz fight. I am drooling at this fight. I want to see it 5 rounds.
So do I.
I do not want to see them try to make that a 3-round fight. And it may be over in 45 seconds. We don't know. But it would be such a disservice, and it just really would be such a disservice. I would have loved to see the Pettis Diaz fight go 5 rounds. I mean, that was a high level, high skill match.
Yeah, I think Anthony was pretty much done at the end of that third, though. But yeah, I actually thought Nate was going to get the finish in that third when he dropped him with that knee. Pettis, as you just segued to the Pettis Masvidal fight, that fight's definitely going to happen. I mean,
Diaz Masvidal.
My apologies, Diaz.
Like, I ain't got no shits about Showtime. He can go on. Diaz Masvidal.
That's been trending all over social media, and that's definitely fight going to happen. But I think that you just mentioned what is right, and the UFC's had this kind of mentality for the past several years that they can't headline the last time I remember a pay-per-view being headlined that didn't have a title fight in the main event was Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz at 170. And if they do not think that they can headline a pay-per-view with that fight without it being without a title fight ahead of it and make that fight 5 rounds, they're crazy. But the other, that fight's one of the top 2 or 3 biggest fights that they could make right now, and I guarantee it's going to happen. But if the UFC wanted to hire me, I would give them a suggestion right now. I think this is the perfect time for them to go ahead and move welterweight to 175, have Usman and Colby fight for that title later this year, keep it at welterweight, open up the 65 division, and make that the title fight.
That would be beautiful.
Make Nate and Jorge the title fight, because they both fought at 55. 65, they're undersized welterweights in comparison to guys like Kamaru Usman and Tyron Woodley. 65 pounds is their division, and I think that they could easily be a 5-round title fight for a 165-pound division, and the money's there. And I don't see why they wouldn't want to do that. It's just Dana's had such a...
Dana hates to give Diaz anything.
Well, he hates to do anything with 65 too. He's been really, which I think that's a better point, because if this was Conor McGregor wanting a 3rd title on the books,
it would have been done.
Yeah, he would have made the 65 division already,
or John Jones.
Something. I mean, yeah.
There's a couple of fighters that right now I feel like he'd bend over backwards for Colby Covington. It's just the Diaz brothers have never been willing to shut up and do what they're told. That's just not who they are, and it's never who they're going to be, but that's why people love them so much.
Yeah.
And
that they just back it up when they get in the cage. And Nate is really, I mean, those Conor McGregor fights not only made him a millionaire, they made him a gigantic star in this sport.
yeah.
And and Masvidal is running really high right now after the Askren loss, and people are really gravitating toward his personality. I mean, if you count McGregor still as an active fighter, he's still the top superstar in the sport. He would draw the biggest numbers, but right underneath them, I would say, is Diaz and Masvidal, with the exception of maybe Adesanya. But those are the handful at the very top. I
don't think Adesanya pulls the numbers Diaz is.
Maybe not yet, but if he goes, they're about to do 65, 70,000 in a stadium in Australia later this year. Yeah. So, and he's got the potential of being that big star. But I don't think it's John Jones. I don't think John Jones is pulling the numbers that Diaz or Masvidal would right now.
I think a lot of people are just sick of Jones.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think Khabib would either. I think that'll be reflected with the Khabib-Poirier fight.
I mean, look, with Masvidal and Diaz, you have the gamer versus the stoner. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what you got. You literally have a civil war, right? Like, that's what you're putting in a cage. You're putting a social civil war in a cage. You have Masvidal, game-bred fighter, right? Like, even in his videos, in his little clips he does, he's playing arcade games and everything else, you know, that's his thing. And then you got Diaz, that's all about CBD, all about cannabis, and that's his thing. And you have so much intersection in those two, but then also you have entirely different populations as well. So I really, literally, even Brock Lesnar, like, as far as UFC fans go, now you throw Brock Lesnar on a card, you're going to get some wrestling fans, right? Wrestling fans. And so, okay, but it's not going to pull the money. And it's not, here's the thing. Dana can get away with paying Nate and George less than he could Brock and Stipe.
Probably, but at the same time, I see Nate and Masvidal as being two people that are gonna have their teams on each other's lines across the coast, saying, "Look, we know this is happening, and we both need to pull our weight with the company to get what we deserve for this fight."
Oh, for sure. Who was it, honey, that organized their fight outside of the UFC?
That was Pettis and Diaz.
Yeah, Pettis and Diaz. Mm-hmm. They didn't even use the UFC to organize their fight this time. Like, that was the smartest thing I ever heard. And they had much less animosity. There was much less. I don't really, look, I don't go digging out old contracts or trying to find what's written in these guys' contracts. I'm sure it's confidential, but you can find just about anything on the internet, you know? Mm-hmm. But I feel like that's the way it should be. It should be a fighter in their team reaching out to another fighter in their team saying, we want to make this fight. These terms work for me. These terms work for you. And it's like a divorce, right? Like, I want this, you want this, let's decide on it, and then go to the judge.
Just to play devil's advocate on that topic, though, the only thing that scares me about that is that we're going to end up in a type of boxing scenario where it's going to be almost impossible to get big fights made because these guys are independent contractors. And they are just there's no overarching body anymore directing, like, no, you're going to fight so-and-so. And that's what we've kind of seen with the UFC, and they've been able to get away with that for a long time. But really, I mean, this is something to thank Conor McGregor about because he's been the first guy that's come in and said, no, I'm going to negotiate on my terms. And on that subject, you brought up Diaz, negotiating his own fight, really, with Anthony Pettis and all these. They don't want to go fight these heavy wrestlers anymore. They don't want to fight the Kamaru Usmans, the Colby Covingtons. They're wanting to fight fights that are favorable for them stylistically, and they know that those are going to be bigger fights anyway. They're like, screw the belt. I don't even care about the belt. That's not even what I'm looking for. I'm looking for money and eyeballs to my fight. And Nate Diaz would have such a much better type of fight lined up and for his bank account and for his reputation with a fight with Masvidal than he would if they were to give him a title shot right now with Usman. And a much more
100%.
favorable matchup.
I mean, it's like he said, what was it? His interview, he said, him and Masvidal, you know, he was talking about how, like, they give this guy this title fight and this guy that title fight and this guy that title fight. He's like, nah, me and Masvidal, we're going to fight for the baddest motherfucker on the planet title. Like, that's what we're going to do. And that's the truth. Like, that is the 100% truth. It's the truth, though. That's the thing. Everybody wants to see, everybody that's a fight fan, anybody that's followed Masvidal back from when he was in Miami-Dade, back from when he had the backyard wrestling, was it with Kimbo? With Kimbo Slice, and then seeing Nate come up. And, you know, Nate has not just UFC fans. I mean, he's got the huge cannabis industry that he's, like, very large a part of, has his own, you know, lines of things. And then also he's a triathlete, right? So he crosses like multiple barriers. So when you want to give Brock Lesnar these like bonus points because he brings in the WWE fans, Diaz is going to bring a lot of people that maybe won't normally turn on a combat sport of some type. You know what I mean? And so there's no fight. There is no, and I know you'd say there one. No, I really don't think so. I don't think there are any fights whatsoever right now that any fight fan wants to see more than that fight. I don't think there are any fights that will get more pay-per-view buys than that fight. And I don't think there will be any fights that have probably more scalpers for people trying to get into that fight. I just don't see it. I don't see a single matchup that has the same excitement behind it.
It's funny. I shared a meme yesterday, and it was like on top. It was some woman. It said it was like men only care about one thing, and it's disgusting. On the bottom, it had a picture of Diaz and Masvidal, and it made me.
Hey, now I take offense to that.
Yeah, like it's more than just men, but it was funny. But you know, it's so crazy to me too, because the way that perception works, that you know we're only like the people that were really just the best of their generation, of their division, that were beating everybody, the Khabibs, the Usmans, the Woodleys, all these people, GSPs, they're going to be remembered more is the whole idea. I don't think we're seeing that with MMA, because you've got two guys in Masvidal and Diaz who have definitely had their share of losses. And I mean, I can think of several people that have beat Nate Diaz inside the cage, and you see this with kind of Cowboy Cerrone too. But man,
nobody cares.
Nobody cares. They always bring it, and they've just been consistent. Especially somebody like Cowboy Cerrone and Masvidal, who have, even though they've been knocked down, they come right back, and they're even in their losses, they put on a good performance. Even if they get ran through like Cerrone did by RDA, he comes right back and goes on a 3-5 win streak. And people just gravitate towards certain styles and certain personalities. And I think that we're starting to see more of them just understanding that they are a brand, that they are a stock. And they want to be pleasing to the fans. They want to fight other ones that are going to bust them up. And Nate Diaz doesn't want to go in there with Khabib or with Usman and get taken down and ragdolled for 5 rounds and go to a boring decision. He wants to be in there with somebody that's going to bang his face up, like a Conor McGregor or a George Masvidal. And it's just brilliant strategy. But
I mean, it is, but at the same time, I don't know that it's so much that they don't want to be laid on by wrestlers. I think some of it is, it's a respect thing, right? Mm-hmm. So we know that a lot of this, there's a lot of respect and disrespect involved in the fight game. And for fighters like Nate and Cowboy, at least personally, and I feel like I'm not alone in this, one of the reasons that I love them and like George so much is that their shit talking is very limited, right? Like Nate talks a lot of shit, but it's limited shit. Mm-hmm. It's not like over the top, going after your everybody. I'm an asshole shit talker, right? He's just like, I'm gonna beat your ass. You know I'm gonna beat your ass, right? and Gamebred's kind of the same way. And so I think, and then you got Cowboy, he's the same way. He don't really talk a lot of shit, and I really think there is a certain enjoyment for hardcore fight fans, the people that are there for the MMA aspect, the people that are there to watch the content, not the extras.
And there's a mental game with these type of fighters. I won't ever forget hearing one of my favorite things that I heard Miguel and Chad talking. This was before I think I even joined the podcast. They were talking about they were just reliving old school MMA days, and they were talking about the early days of the UFC, and they were talking about all these different style of martial artists that came in and stuff. And then they started talking. They were doing I think an episode on Tank Abbott. And they were talking about Tank coming in as just a blood and gut street fighter, but about how he was just not intimidated walking to that cage. He wasn't scared at all. For that first fight comes out at UFC 1, a guy gets knocked down, gets his tooth kicked out of his head, and it's like, oh wow, is this even legal? And then you see Tank Abbott walking to the cage. He's not intimidated at all to fight. Like, he's like, yeah, I'm in for this. Knocks a guy out, then mocks him and stuff as he's, like, convulsing on the ground. And then you flash forward more than that, 20, 25 years, and you got these type of guys who we still to this day see high-level, well-trained athletes that are still mental head cases. We talked a little bit about it with even DC earlier. And that was one thing I was saying when Diaz took the first McGregor fight on short notice. I'm like, man, you are going to get somebody going in there with Conor McGregor who is not going to choke under the pressure like Jose Aldo did. But this is a guy who is not going to care. He's not going to care walking into that cage under those lights in that pressure. He's there to fight. And you saw that in the lead up of it. He was not intimidated at all. And
I think that actually helped him.
Absolutely.
I think because that's a huge part of Conor's game. Is to like psych you out before you get in there. And it's funny because like I always thought like you're trying to talk shit talker to like the number one shit talker. Like this isn't gonna work for you.
Oh yeah, like I want to forget him. And Conor said a lot. Do that for the lead up to the first Diaz fight was my all time favorite. That was the funnest week in the history of MMA for me because I remember Conor talking about this guy he makes gun signs with one hand and animal balloons with the left hand, and he's an old cholo from the streets, but then teaches kid jiu-jitsu on Sunday mornings. Like they were great, brilliant lines. It was like almost like there's no way he's just flying these off the cuff on the hands, and then Diaz is coming back like, you're talking about I don't have training partners. Like, you're playing touch butt with that dork in the park. Like,
I laughed so hard at the touch butt comment.
It was so great. And it was just so like, man, he is going to get in there and he's going to take his licks, but he's going to stay in there. And sure enough, it showed that when Conor fought with some resistance, and to give Conor credit, the second fight, he came back and pushed through it. But
I'm pretty sure Sal D'Amato was one of the scorers on that fight. And anything with Sal D'Amato that goes to the scorecard, you can bet it's going to be crooked.
I always thought that Diaz won the second McGregor fight because I thought he won the second, the third, and the fifth. And
he did.
Everybody
on the scorecards even.
Everybody questions me on that second round because he got knocked down twice, but that was in the first minute of the round. He got up both times. And I'm an old school pride guy. Like, I want to know where they were, like Joe Rogan says, at the end of that round. And at the end of the second round, Conor was in survival mode. And I truly believe that the fourth round I gave to Conor, but that was only because there was so much blood in Nate's eyes that he just kind of took the round off. But that's neither here nor there. These are great just characters for the sport. And Nate Diaz, Masvidal, I think is going to be a monster fight. I expect it at Madison Square Garden in November. I think it can headline. I think it can headline without a title fight on there. But I'm really afraid they're going to try to make Usman and Colby the main event with that as the co-main event. And if they do that, I don't know why they can't do it like boxing and just negotiate and say we want it to be a 5-round fight, whether it's a main event or not, whether it's for a title or not. I don't know why they couldn't do that.
I have no look. Okay. So normally I watch the early prelims, the prelims, and the main card. It's a thing. I did not even turn the early prelims on this week. Do you know why?
Why was that?
Do you know how long of a time block early prelims were scheduled for?
No.
90 minutes. Do you know how many 3-round fights were scheduled in that 90 minutes?
3 probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's 45 minutes. So just stretching out. But I mean,
Uh-huh.
but don't they use those early prelims as kind of like a kind of promoting the big show at the end of the night?
Yeah, of course they do. But really, 50% of your card is filler?
True.
50%? Like, if you have 45 minutes on the early prelims card to fill with filler, you've got 20 more minutes to give that fight.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I
Or
see.
10
I
more
definitely
minutes to
see your
give that
point there.
fight. Like, you
I
know what
th-
I'm saying? Like, if you're gonna put 45 minutes in bullshit on early prelims, you can give them 5 rounds. You can make it up in the time slots. Like, you can maintain your structure. You can maintain, the planing, the plug and play. It's all set up on a reel. They plug in the graphics for that week and the sound bites, and it rolls. Like, you can give them that 10 minutes.
Well, even and on top of that, I remember the days for the Madison Square Garden card or the July International Fight Week card where they would have a heavyweight title fight, a welterweight title fight, and then they would throw something on there like Joanna Jędrzejczyk fighting Karolina Kowalkiewicz, just a guaranteed 5-round, just point fight by Joanna, almost like it's
Right.
almost guaranteed it's going 5 rounds in the middle
Right.
of the card. If they can do that, and a lot of those times, I mean, I remember several nights where you'd have 15, I mean, you'd have 15 rounds of championship fights. If they can do
Yeah.
that, I don't care. In November, they can make Usman and Colby and Masvidal and Diaz to headline that card, 2
I
5-round
don't know.
fights.
Masvidal doesn't even want to fight in Madison Square Garden. He said the last time he was up there, people were like not cool to him, and he does
Well,
not
the,
really
the,
want to
the
go
New
back.
York Commission's been horrible, but it is such a coveted spot. And the only other thing I can think of would be the New Year's Eve card at the end of the year has always been pretty big. But usually the 2 biggest UFC cards are the International Fight Week and the Madison Square Garden
But
card.
here's my thing. Why would you do that? Why would you take a card that's already big just because of
And
when
throw
it
that
is
on there.
and
Yeah,
throw
throw
that
that
on it?
on
Why not take like Thanksgiving-ish?
Super Bowl weekend or something. Well, that if they would turn around and do it that quick.
Right, but what I'm saying is why not put it on a weekend that isn't great big already, that isn't already going to have huge numbers because they're standard fights, you know? Why not give it its own? I mean, I want to see it in Northern California. There, what is it? Golden One Center.
Mm-hmm.
It's
It does
45
need.
minutes. It's 45 minutes from Stockton. Could you imagine that fight 45 minutes from Stockton?
It's where it should probably be, but it would. We're probably going to be looking at January, February for that. And the reason why the UFC, I think, is typically obviously this big summer card and internet. I mean, they do July because it's the middle of the summer and people are,
Right.
that's an obvious one.
But
The
that's
reason
even become lackluster.
it was this year at least. Well, I mean, they had Askren and
They used to have
Masvidal.
fights like 4 nights during International
Yeah, they
Fight
had
Week,
they had the
and
Ultimate
they've gone
Fighter
down to like
finale
one
and then.
card.
But I think the reason why they have the Madison Square Garden card usually the first week of November is because it gets their big end of the year card really out of the way before Christmas because people don't really want to spend $60 on a pay-per-view 2 weeks before Christmas a lot of times. Which confuses me why they usually have an end of the year card that's actually pretty big because that's when people are the most cash strapped from spending money on Christmas typically.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're probably gonna sit on that fight a little while, and they deserve it. I know Nate doesn't fight as much anymore because of the scar tissue that he
He said he
has.
wants to fight within. He said if it all works out right, it should be next month. I mean, they're already talking.
Man,
They're already talking about it. Like it's already being worked out right now.
that's what I'm saying. Like it wouldn't surprise me if the UFC tries to do what they can to make that happen in November.
Yeah.
We'll see. No matter what, that fight's gotta happen, and it's. I also love that meme I saw this week of that I shared. It was Nate holding Connor's hand, and he's like looking back at some girl that walked by. Well, it's supposed to be some girl that walked by, but it's like a Photoshop picture of Masvidal, and he's like checking him out, and like the face of Connor's like looking at Nate like, really? Like, you're just gonna forget about me? Like Nate's looking at her like, yeah, like this is a much bigger fight now. Like I don't even need Connor anymore. So, but moving on, because we do got to at least cover one more thing. We brought up Adesanya a little bit earlier, and he's got a monster middleweight title fight in Australia in October. They're expecting 65, 70,000 people in a stadium in Sydney, I believe. And that's going to be a big middleweight title fight. And I said on my preview that I believe that if things work out in a logical sequence, which they never do, we would see the winner of that fight the winner of Costa and Romero. But then we got literally the fight of the night, one of the fights of the year, but super controversial, super close, in a fight that I'm not so sure. I think Costa won. And if it was a 5-round fight, I definitely don't think he would have won. So, but nevertheless, we got a new undefeated contender.
And I like Costa, like, a lot.
He is a monster. And I knew that he
No, I mean,
actually,
just also from, like, he's pretty.
Yeah, I can understand that. He looks like he's juiced to the gills, though. But I mean, but so does Romero. But
I was gonna say, but next to Romero, that's like, you know, my husband jokes about having a like a super league where you just let everybody juice and they all fight each other. And I'm like, man, can you imagine like the Uberim
TRT
days?
Vitor?
Yeah.
Killing guys, spitting back, kicking people and stuff. Yeah,
I know. If they just let it go, if they just let it happen, you know, like it would be pretty cool to see some of these, like, but then you have, like, you know, they get slow. Once they get so big, they get slow. And then it's not exciting.
Well, then you've got guys like Michael Bisping literally having lifelong eye problems because TRT Vitor comes through and just blasts him out of there real quick. And but when I was watching this fight over the weekend, I'm like, dude, these guys, TRT Vitor has nothing on these two animals. I mean, that was a scary looking fight. But you know, I've always said it. No amount of steroids, no amount of performance-enhancing power that comes from that beats fluidity, and we've seen that with the Whitaker fights. I mean, Whitaker fought, that was really fighting power with finesse, and he fought it well. I thought that he lost the second fight close to Romero. I think Romero maybe should have won this decision. But then when I look at somebody like Israel Adesanya, we're looking at a guy who's just literally, his background is second to none in this division in terms of high-level striking. And it's the same thing we saw with Anderson Silva earlier this year. And I'm a huge Rob Whitaker fan, but when I look at that fight, I don't see where he wins, because we're talking about a guy who's got 90-some professional kickboxing bouts and lost like 5 of them and has looked like deadly sharp since he's been in the UFC. And then when I look at these guys, you know, I see a lot of power, but I also see a lot of holes. And I'm not, but at the same time, man.
But how long? But hold on, let's think about it. Romero's been around a couple years. Costa even less. I mean, what is their fight IQ really? You know, give them a few years, put them in those situations and those fights a little more often, and it would be interesting to see how they develop.
Well, and I would say that Romero might not have a few years, but at the same time, it's literally a known fact that Fidel Castro burned a lot of birth certificates and stuff, and a lot of the records weren't really kept very well in Cuba. We really don't know if this man's really as old as what they list him as, like 40-some years old, because that man don't look 40 years old. And if he's 40, that's the new 30. Like, that gives me hope as a 29-year-old man that there's some hope for me, because, man, like that guy is a super athlete at 41, and he don't look like he's slowing down. I mean, he took some just crazy shots in this fight with his jaw wide open, mocking him.
I know. I saw that too.
I'm sitting here watching this. I'm like, dude, this guy doesn't even have his neck like goes into his shoulders. It's like, and you know, how are you going to knock that man out? Like, and then you hear like people like Rob Whitaker talking about kicking Yoel Romero's like kicking steel, and Luke Rockhold saying he's never felt a human like that. Like he's never when they would lock up in the clinch, he's like, I've never felt somebody that felt like that. And like this guy is literally chiseled out of stone. And
I
then
mean,
not only is he like an Olympic caliber wrestler, but he flies through the air and knocks people out like Chris Weidman and stuff.
yeah.
So he's terrifying. And Costa, to be able to just go straight forward on this guy, not intimidated at all.
With
That
a
was
small amount of experience.
mm-hmm.
Like Costa has so much room to grow. Like
No.
he needs to get his cardio up, work on his accuracy, but he has so much room to grow.
He looked a little leaner in this fight, don't you think? Like I thought that was a good sign. Like he needs to lean out a little bit.
I mean, I've already admitted a bias. I don't really pay attention to how much more muscly or less muscly he looks. But I mean, but that's standard rule, you know, like big, strong muscles aren't like great big muscles aren't necessarily the strongest muscles, right?
They fatigue.
Right. And so really, maybe he did. Maybe he put it somewhere else, but I don't know. I really think that Costa has the ability to be great in that division. He just needs a higher fight IQ. He just needs more ring time.
Mm-hmm.
Ring time with guys like Romero, right? Like not just general ring time. He needs time with like high level guys because I think it's going to take a high level guy to get him there.
Yeah, and like he was coming up, he's been coming up at about the same time that Adesanya has. They both came into the UFC about the same time. And, you know, when you look at that, you see two new middleweight top 5 contenders, undefeated, who are buzzsawing through people. But then but that doesn't really spell that. It's kind of like, I don't know if you're too familiar with Vasily Lomachenko in boxing. The man doesn't even have 15 professional boxing matches, but he had 300 some amateur boxing matches. He's probably the most decorated amateur in history. And when you see that compared to a guy who's on his 13th, 14th pro fight on average, totally different. And yeah, Adesanya and might be 15-0 and Costa might be 13-0, but that does not tell the story. You're talking, as you said about fight IQ, you're talking about one guy who's got literally 100 combat sporting competitions under his belt professionally in kickboxing and boxing.
Yeah.
And now is undefeated in MMA compared to a very physically imposing, talented guy, clearly, but is just a little bit green. So I think rushing him into a title fight with either Whitaker or Adesanya after this would be a little bit of a rush. But so what do
I
they
agree.
do, though? Do they run it back with Yoel?
I don't know. I mean, I don't even really want to see him fight for a title yet. I'd rather see him fight another top level guy because he hasn't really had that like dominance to him that you usually see before a run up to a title fight. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't think he's ready. I think if he goes, he loses.
Yeah. There was another middleweight that fought on this card that we can cover briefly that might be in a position to fight him next. And that was Derek Brunson. Pulled off what I thought. I thought Brunson, if there was one big, I was saying in my pre-fight, when you look at the guys that Brunson has lost to, he's lost a very controversial loss to Anderson Silva that I thought he won. And I love Anderson. But other than that, he lost to Jacare. He got knocked out by Adesanya, which that was an embarrassing fight. He lost to Romero. He lost to Rob Whitaker, which anybody who watched that fight knows that he just came at him balls to the wall right from the jump. He's only lost to top level guys. And I thought he looked a lot more seasoned in this fight, a lot more calm. He had great takedown defense, picked his shots really well, and defeated a young, charging Ian Heinisch, who has been coming up the ranks, and really just showed, no, I'm a top 10 middleweight. Don't forget about it. Yeah, you're good, you're coming up, but you're still young. I've had my losses. I've been on the downs. I've been going downhill kind of. But I'm still an elite level middleweight, and he kind of proved it. I think him and Costa could be a possibly good matchup next moving forward. It's kind of Costa
that
going.
would be a great match.
Is Costa going backwards a little bit? I think maybe a Kelvin Gastelum or a Jack Hermanson. One of these guys might be a little bit more appropriate, but I wouldn't mind seeing Costa in Brunson.
No, absolutely not. Especially after Brunson's performance. I feel like it definitely gives him, he has earned a top contender, and I think that he should get one. So I feel like it will give Costa more ring time. It'll give him more education. Maybe he'll lose. Who knows? But I think that could be a really good fight too. Heck, throw it on the Masvidal Diaz card.
Absolutely. And one more thing that I want to cover on this card that I can't believe that this was not only thrown on the prelims, but then wasn't even like the main event of the prelims, was Cory Sandhagen's fight with Rafael Assunção. Sandhagen's now 5-0 in the UFC at bantamweight division, just beat a top 5 bantamweight. Before this, he won a decision over John Lineker.
Right.
When I look at Sandhagen, well, I was going to say, when I look at Sandhagen, I see kind of like a Dominic Cruz here, only with I believe, a little bit more power. And this is such an underrated division right now. Now that TJ Dillashaw's out, it kind of left a void at this division, kind of left a vacuum. It was obviously filled with the title fight between Moraes and Cejudo. Cejudo's now the champ. But in this division, we've got a lot of young talent coming up. You still got Moraes still in there. Now you got Sandhagen, you got Petr Yan, you've got Aljamain Sterling and Pedro Munoz. You still got old champs like Cody Garbrandt in there. Uriah Faber just came back, and he's in there. But he's still a name that's mixed up. He looked good in his comeback fight. But the biggest X factor that just got announced a couple weeks ago about this division is finally Frankie Edgar is dropping down to his normal weight class. He announced that he's going to be moving down to bantamweight. So when you consider all these different names in this division, I see
Frankie could sit pretty high there.
I think he can win. I think he can beat Cejudo.
But does he have it in him? But can he really?
I think he can, because he's always been.
Cejudo's what, like gold level wrestling?
Yeah, but could Cejudo go fight guys like Benson Henderson that have fought at welterweight, or who else? I mean, he fought Jose Aldo twice to a decision. He fought. He just went 5 rounds with Max Holloway. I'm not sure that Cejudo could go 5 rounds with Max Holloway. I mean, there's a big size difference there. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's fought at flyweight compared to a guy who was the champ at 55. And
yeah, I don't know. I'm one of those people that I want to see Edgar hang it up. I'm just kind of, when you get to the point where you're having to drop weight classes to like do well, like obviously either your muscle mass or your timing, something is starting to slack, And so at what point do we stop just saying, you're losing at this weight class, man, you need to go down. You need to go down or you're just going to keep losing. Well, is it a forced move or is he doing it on his own, right? Like, is the company saying you're not allowed to fight at this weight class anymore?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've been saying that Frankie Edgar should go down to bantamweight for several years, though, because he's always been he was a very small 55, and then he went down to 45, and he was also not. I mean, he wasn't a big featherweight either.
Right.
At this point in his career, at 38 years old, I mean, that's going to be a tough cut. But
that's literally what I'm worried about. Like, this guy, like you said, he's been running 45 and 55, and at his age, like, we're sitting here saying guys need to stop cutting, guys need to stop cutting, guys need to stop cutting. Well, he's short and stocky. He's what my grandma called a barrel-chested man. Like, he's short and stocky, and he's always going to be short and stocky. I really worry what cutting an extra 20 pounds, Devin. 20 pounds when you're a small man. That's a lot. That's a lot. And I really worry, I don't want to go to a place where how we had Connor when he was down at 55 and looked awful at what, 45? Yeah, 45. He looked like a Skeletor.
He looked terrible at that weight class. But the reason I brought Frankie up and just the depth of this division is I do see, especially with guys like Sterling and Petr Yan, who I think is terrifying, and now Sandhagen, who's very fluid and very technical.
Yeah.
I think Sandhagen and Edgar that could be a potential matchup for Frankie coming down to this weight class as an introduction, because it's not a fight like with somebody like Petr Yan that could maybe, if the cut don't go well, could honestly knock, Frankie cold. But it would also be a fight that I think could see like maybe a passing of the baton if Sandhagen were to win, going on to probably fight for the title, or it could be Frankie Edgar comes down, beats a top contender, and we see him in Cejudo after that. So I think that's a good matchup. I'm really high on Cory Sandhagen. I'm really high on this division altogether. I think that this division has a lot of young talent that I think that it spells for some good years going forward. I'm a little worried about Cejudo holding up the division, trying to defend 2 titles and being kind of a prima donna. But but nevertheless, there's some serious talent in this division, and moving forward, I'm excited about it. And I think Cory Sandhagen's a good addition. And Assunção sat quietly near the top of this division for many years, but I think that this was kind of his push back down to journeyman status from here on.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I'd love to see Frankie there. I mean, I'm not excited about it. I think standalone as his fighter, as himself, and against the other guys, I think he could hold his own or even lead the division. My concern is, can he do it at that weight, right? We're talking about Frankie Edgar as we've known him and loved him and what we see him look like at the 45 and 55. I don't know. We're not going to have the same Frankie Edgar at 35. It's not going to be the same guy. Not at all.
Maybe I'm a little biased because I've always been somebody that I have always said that Frankie Edgar is to me one of the absolute greatest of all time because pound for pound. And I would love to see him validate my opinion of him by going down to bantamweight, because if he became a 2-division champion, it's at 55 and 35, and he's competed for titles in 3 weight classes, I would have to be able to finally have the argument that I've tried to say for Frankie forever, that this is a guy who never fought in his proper weight class. Like he could have dominated bantamweight for years, and he fought up in weight class while guys like Dominic Cruz and Uriah Faber, guys that I really believe that he would have easily beat, were leading this division. So, and then arguably maybe you could have even gone up, and he really competed well with Aldo in that first fight, not so much the second fight, but I'm glad he was never in there with Conor, because I wouldn't have wanted to watch that. But going down to 35, I'm maybe I'm a little biased, but I'm hopeful that he'll be able to hang strong there. But with that, Amanda, we've been going for a while. This has been a great podcast, great wrap up. We've covered a whole lot because there's a lot to talk about, and it sounds like we have really a lot of things to look forward to in the world of MMA. And is there anything that you want to end this with?
I just wanted to say, we talk a little bit about like the fighters that are struggling like mentally with things and what that looks like. And, when I read DC's Instagram post, the first thing I thought was, please tell me someone is getting him a therapist. Tell me he has someone to like talk this through with that isn't his wife, that isn't his kids, that isn't in his corner. Someone that's just there for him. And so I think that's something we should talk about. We should really talk about the mental care that these guys are getting, because fights like that, they can break you.
Yeah, and we talked on here the very first time we ever talked about exit strategies with these fighters, and exactly. I don't see a clearer path to exit for any fighter yet than DC, because we've seen it where these guys don't know how to transition into something other than being the fighter.
Well, he's already a football coach or a wrestling coach, and he loves it.
Yeah, a commentator. His show detail. I mean, he's amazing at it. I think that he could have part in the company and promotional aspects and stuff. I mean, I think there's unlimited amount of stuff that this man can do. I think that he might even be hired on by ESPN for other stuff. So, and I think he knows that. And I don't think damaging his brand by losing any more fights might not be good for him. But he's also a competitor, though. And
you're exactly right, though.
Yeah. And he might want to be in there like, no, I can beat Stipe in that third fight, and that's going to be great for me if I can go win that trilogy. So,
but then that's where the therapy comes in, man, because he still thinks he could beat John Jones too, and I don't really know anybody that thinks he can or will.
No, I that got brought up. I always have 20, 30 people at my house. That got brought up, and pretty much I was surprised because I guess I'm living in like an MMA junkie echo chamber around, like to where I hear people theoretically talk about potential fights, but to the casual average fan, that was laughed off. Like, oh, come on, dude, he ain't gonna beat John Jones. Like, I was like, whoa, I didn't expect people. Well, if it's not DC, who's going to? And pretty much nobody. People are just kind of sick of the whole John Jones thing because they don't like him and they don't think he's gonna get beat, so they just don't even care anymore. And so like, and even with Daniel,
super dominant champions kill a division,
especially when they're not likable, especially when they're not like a Tyson who's just wrecking guys. You know, Francis Ngannou might be able to knock guys out in the first round for 5 years, and people will tune in just to see if somebody can get out of the first round with him. Kind of like how they did during the Tyson prime. Is just, can anybody survive with this guy?
Well, Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey was the same thing. You know, her first 6, 7 fights. I mean, the first 3, 4, they were all arm bars, and she even made videos. This is how I do a judo show. The judo throw. This is how I get you in an armbar. People knew exactly how she did it and still couldn't stop her.
Right.
You know, and so it's in both sides. We're seeing it.
Yep, I totally agree. So, and we'll bring that up next week. How about that? Because I want to start making this a regular thing again, Amanda. I was glad to get you on tonight. So, we'll talk again soon. And I always enjoy conversating with you. It flows super well when we get on here and talk about this kind of stuff. But this has been the CRP. UFC 241 is in the books. It was an amazing card. I believe the card of the year. And if you didn't catch everything we talked about, hit rewind and go watch it. But thank you, Amanda, and we'll talk again soon.
Bye.